Yan, kamusta kayo folks? Been a while since nag-last FB Alive tayo. So ngayon, thanks to Mark Zuckerberg, hindi na tayo mag-FB Alive, mag-Meta Alive na tayo, no? Meta Alive. But the problem is that of course kailangan natin ng energy level and interesting topics before natin pwede pag-usapan yung mga meta topics for Meta Alive analysis. Anyways, napansin ko nung last FB Live natin, medyo okay naman yung level of engagements and discussions. Ang pinag-usapan po natin is yung mga ideas of Sigmund Freud and Max Weber, and ginamit natin yung mga ideas na yan in order to analyze paano naging ganong kasikat yung mga Marcuses. No? So we kind of tried to connect some of the lectures that Max Weber gave 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago dyan sa Munich, to kind of make sense of the failures of the Philippines educational institutions and democratic institutions in the past 3 decades, which has paved the way for the reemergence of Marcuses as the force to reckon with in the coming elections. Now, for today, I thought we'll do something similar to that, pero ang gusto natin pag-usapan ngayon siguro is something that is very relevant and will remain relevant for generations to come, if not for centuries to come. At ito yung issue ng climate change. No? Ito ay isang issue na malapit sa aking puso. And in fact, in some of my recent works, including in my latest book, The Indo-Pacific, that is very much at the center of my discussions dun sa last chapter, no? Pax Pacifica. No? I'll discuss that a little bit later on more. Ngayon, of course, kung fina-follow niyo yung mga news, alam niyo na may mga negotiations sa COP26, if I'm not mistaken, in Glasgow, no? In United Kingdom. So yung mga world leaders, at least yung mga nag-bother to attend, ay nag-gather dyan sa United Kingdom to discuss the future of humanity's efforts to mitigate climate change at i-ensure na magkaroon tayo ng mga sapat na adaptation regimes. No? So, in short, pag pinag-usapan po natin ng climate change, there are a number of things you have to keep in mind. First of all, it's anthropogenic. Ibig sabihin yan, hindi ito ay produkto ng cyclical changes in climatic patterns. Hindi po totoo yung sinasabi ng iba dyan, yung mga Trumper style na tao, sinasabi nila na hindi, talagang every 1,000 years or every few thousand years or every few hundreds of thousand years, ang nangyayari is, there'll be massive changes in the average, temperature of Earth, no? And then meron din tayong mga tao na nagsabi na, well, ay lumalamig naman in other places among other things, no? So, first thing we have to keep in mind is that this is anthropogenic. And the consensus, when you say consensus, doesn't have to be 100%, but more than 90% of leading scientists have agreed that ang major cause, no, if not the driver of climate change, is of course yung Industrial Revolution. Yung nagsimula siya sa Scotland, United Kingdom, and later on, of course, nag-spread ito all across the world. And of course, now China is the world's factory, right? But the principles that China is applying today is very much inspired by the early capitalism that developed in light of Industrial Revolution dyan sa United Kingdom. So, ito yung konteksto na pinag-usapan natin. So, anthropogenic siya. No? So, meron tayong agency, meron tayong kakayahan na mag-contribute dito sa climate change in a positive or a negative way. Kaya kailangan natin ng mga negotiations because not a single country can deal with this alone. No? Even the biggest country, they have to cooperate with others. At of course, meron din tayong the issue ng collective action problem. If one country does its own part, pero yung iba ay nag-free ride, then lugi yung bansa na yan. So walang incentive for that country to cut emissions if other countries are not gonna do that. Because, we're talking about the whole planet. Hindi lang yung atmosphere ng China or US or some other country. Interconnected lang yan. Second thing is, when we talk about climate change, ang pinag-usapan po natin dito is average temperature. So it's very possible that in some parts of the world, you're gonna see first snow in 50 years. I think that was the case in New Zealand, for instance, or blizzards in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. But climate change means extreme weather conditions different places kasi na-disrupt yung normal climatic flows, no, at yung global environmental systems natin, no. But on average, umaakyat yung temperature natin. Now, ang hope ng international community, and this was embodied by the Paris Agreement in 2015, was we make sure na compared dun sa pre-industrial revolution levels, hindi aakyat yung global temperature by more than 1.5 degrees. Mukhang malabo mamimit yan, but we really want to avoid 2.5 to 3 degrees. And if it reaches at around 4 degrees in the coming century or so, then magiging very, very fatal yan. In fact, one book that I really suggest you folks to read is this book, The Uninhabitable Earth. No, very well written by David Wallace Wells. Really, dinidocument niya gaano ka maging grabe yung impact ng even very small increases in the global temperature. A lot of parts of the world will be uninhabitable. No? At alam natin, mga bansa katulad ng Pilipinas are extremely vulnerable to climate change. Ngayon pa lang nakikita natin siya. No? So that's the second thing we have to keep in mind. Yes, it could get colder in certain places, but that's because you're gonna have more extreme conditions, weather conditions all around the world. No? But on average, the global temperature has been increasing steadily. No? At ang hope natin is it doesn't breach 1.5 to 2 degrees, but I think realistically 2 degrees to 2.5 degrees Celsius ang dapat target natin dito, because once it goes beyond that, nakakatakot yung situation na mangyayari dito, because based on some of the projections, if we don't do something about climate change, there'll be massive existential implications. Countries, beautiful places like Myanmar, beautiful places like Maldives, will most likely not survive it, perhaps until the end of the century. Even a country like Bangladesh, which is large parts of which is under sea, yung sea level, at very prone sa flooding of Bangladesh may also cease to exist, no, by the end of the century if tuloy-tuloy itong climate change, because habang umiinit yung earth, no, umaakyat yung sea levels dahil na-melt yung mga ice caps natin, at mga icebergs natin dyan sa, of course, the extreme poles of the earth, especially sa North Pole. No? Pag nag-melt yan, of course, sea levels go high, apektado yung mga big cities. Of course, Manila, apektado din tayo dito because next tayo sa dagat, di ba? Sa West Philippine Sea. So, malaking issue yan. Now, of course, some of the projections are really, really scary. Just to read you some of them, and I actually have a summary of a lot of this important data dito sa book ko sa Indo-Pacific, dun sa final chapter 9, I think, chapter 9 dito. Nilagay ko lahat yung mga details, very important details here, na dapat pag-usapan natin siguro in the future in more detail. I mean, this is it. A single degree Celsius increase in global warming could reduce global GDP, no, yung economic output natin, by as much as 1.2%. A quarter of per capita incomes by the end of the century could be affected by that. Kung tuloy-tuloy, no, yung pag-increase ng yung global temperature, average temperature, no, even every half a degree increase in global temperatures, there'll be 10 to 20% increase in likelihoods of conflict. So habang umakyat yung global temperature, of course, nagkakaroon ng disasters, crisis, extreme weather conditions. So that in itself contributes also to resource competition. That in itself creates essentially a kind of a cascade effect, no? Nagkakaroon din ng competition, violent competition over resources, nagde-decay yung mga state institutions, nagkakagulo yung bansa. So, in some extreme cases, countries like Bangladesh, big cities like Jakarta, island nations like Maldives, are gonna face existential challenges by the end of the century. But the whole world is gonna suffer in one way or another. Global GDP could be slashed by a significant degree, by several points at least, by the end of the century kung hindi natin itatakal yan. So we're talking about potentially, trillions of dollars ang pinag-usapan po natin dito, no? At the other thing that we also have to keep in mind here is that yung impression natin dito is that climate change, yung factors na contribute sa climate change are something that go back to centuries, no? But actually, kung titignan mo yung data, much of yung concentration ng carbon emission dun sa atmosphere natin, which is of course blocking yung return of the sun's reflection on Earth and keeping the warmth inside. Of course, I'm simplifying yung environmental science here. Much of that actually happened in the past 30 or 40 years. In fact, in the past 30 years, so I think sa lifetime natin, mga ka-millennial, no? Close to half of the total concentrated carbon emission dyan sa atmosphere natin happened over the past 30 years or so. So, it is true that European countries, Western countries, and Japan, one of the few Asian countries that industrialized early, sila yung nag-contribute na malaki dito sa climate change, in the early phases of climate change. But the bulk of the new concentration of carbon emission and greenhouse gases actually comes from developing countries, rapidly developing countries katulad ng China, India, and of course many countries in Latin America, Asia, among other things. Just to give you some of the numbers, I mean, nakakatakot. According to WWF, ito yung organization in charge of protection or conservation of environment, close to 60% ng mga species, no, fauna, no, na extinct over the past half a century alone, no. So human beings, even though we're responsible for just 0.01% of life on Earth, we may have been, based on another study, responsible for extinction of more than 80% of all species on Earth since at least the introduction of modern human species, no. So grabe yung naging impact at footprint natin dito sa Earth, no, very negative in many ways. Now, quickly, I want to go through 4 points. First of all, of course, pagdating dito sa issue ng climate change, we have the concept of common yet differentiated responsibility. Ibig sabihin, lahat ng bansa, kahit yung mga pinakamahirap na bansa, kahit yung mga bansa na hindi ganun kalaki yung carbon emissions, may responsibility tayo to contribute to global efforts. So, teamwork dapat ito. But of course, it has to be differentiated because some countries have been more responsible for this than the others, and some countries have more capabilities and resources to deal with this than the others. So, magkakaroon din dapat sana ng solidarity. On the second level, while it's true, as I said, that Japan, and especially Western European countries and the US were major contributors to early phase ng climate change because of yung industrial revolution na nangyari sa kanilang bansa earlier there than here, the reality is that over the past decades, actually, China has emerged as the biggest contributor, no, dito sa carbon emission. In fact, if you look at China, not only yung total gross numbers, but even yung per capita carbon emission nila, even if you take into consideration the fact that, well, may 1.3 billion people dyan, even an average Chinese actually contributes in terms of carbon emission more than the global average, no? And then, if you look at dun sa top 10, top 15 countries, and dami dyan developing countries, hindi lang yung mga Western countries like Japan or developed countries like South Korea, or countries like US, meron kang countries like, meron kang countries like Russia, like India, like Iran, like Brazil. So, many actually developing countries are in the top 10, top 15 countries in terms of total carbon emission. So, they have to make certain contribution to this. Kaya naging malaking issue nung hindi nagpakita si Xi Jinping, no? Hindi nagpakita si Xi Jinping dito sa COP26 negotiations because mahalagang China talaga to any solution to this issue, no? But it seems China is more interested in passing the buck to the West, even though China now is the biggest contributor to carbon emissions. But of course, at the end of the day, this has to be a concerted effort. On the third level, nakikita natin there are some significant efforts in this direction to deal with this problem of climate change. First of all, nakikita natin that in Europe, for instance, they have been setting very strict targets in terms of bringing down carbon emissions and achieving carbon neutrality. So ito yung idea na hopefully down the road, most countries will be reliant on renewable energy. So United Kingdom, European Union, within the next 3 decades, they hope to move towards carbon neutrality. Japan is also slightly moving that direction. South Korea has also made pledges in that direction. Now, the Biden administration has tried to correct yung mga mistakes under Trump because Trump even withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, and there's some Trumper people even question kung anthropogenic to climate change. So may mga denials, climate change denials dyan at mga medyo meta people dyan na medyo inayos ni Biden yan. At of course, kung alam natin, if alam nyo, of course, sa US meron silang Green New Deal ngayon. So, they're gonna invest billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars dun sa kanilang infrastructure to make sure na ito ay increasingly in line not only with economic recovery needs sa US, not only in terms of creating jobs, but also making sure na it helps US to be a carbon neutral economy by 2050 to 2060, somewhere around that time. Kaya major deals major negotiations na nangyari ngayon sa US Congress over a new infrastructure bill at yung tinatawag na Green New Deal. At the same time, nakikita natin that even the private sector, big financial institutions, in Connecticut, even in Wall Street, are also pushing for, dito sa reduction ng emissions, and in fact, kung titingnan niyo yung Tesla, for instance, yung share ng Tesla, kaya nga sobrang yaman ni Elon Musk ngayon, I mean, pinakamayaman na tao on Earth by far, well ahead of Bezos, now. Of course, umakyat yung shares na sa SpaceX, but the other one is also, of course, yung Tesla. And ngayon, hindi lang Tesla, but even yung Chinese electric cars, lahat sila nag-boom yung mga stocks nila all around the world because I think a lot of people are realizing that this is the future. And when we're talking about future, we're talking about 5 to 10 years from now. So many big companies, if I'm not mistaken, Jaguar, among others, have said that within the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to go completely electronic cars, a la Tesla. no, and Toyota and some other big companies are already rolling out their own versions of Tesla. So the private sector and the public sector are moving in major economies, Western economies, but hopefully we see more coordination among states. But lastly, and this is where I go to the case of the Philippines, is because napaka-vulnerable pa natin. No? So if you look at different studies by HSBC, by German think tank, the Global Climate Risk Index na ginawa nila, yung German think tank na yan, obvious ng Pilipinas in the top 10 or top 15 countries na most vulnerable sa climate change. So, dapat pag-usapan din talaga natin ito sa ating elections and with our leaders, signing leaders natin, may plataforma na matino dito sa issue ng environment. We have to make sure that we get the most amount of assistance and funds dun sa mga mas mayayaman ng bansa para makapag-cope tayo dito sa climate change, because, as climate change intensifies, one thing that experts are saying is that yung mga events na once in every 500 years, yung mga hurricane superstorms, yung mga nangyari dati once every 500 years are happening almost every year now. And then yung mga extreme weather conditions, let's say typhoon and tornado and tsunami and all of that, it's possible that down the road they could happen simultaneously in certain parts of the world. I think a few years ago something like that happened in the Western Pacific close to the Hawaii region. So we're gonna see some crazy, scary, Netflix level kind of stuff, no? And of course, that should remind us of yung movie na 2012, no? Yung kay Roland Emmerich movie, kung saan China yung parang gumawa ng Noah's Ark and then China saved the world or something like that. Well, China will be very important with dealing with this, but so we hopefully can get the maximum possible help from the more developed countries and yung mga biggest contributors to climate change to deal with this issue. But at the same time, we also have to do our own, adaptation efforts. So siguro dun sa zoning ng mga bahay, dun sa urban planning natin, in terms of yung mga carbon emission standards natin, among other things, we have to make sure na medyo climate-proof tayo, no? Because the situation could get worse and worse, no? In the years to come. Especially if we don't come up with a significant agreement to deal with this climate change issue. Now, I'm gonna wrap this up because I can talk more about this. In fact, I wanted to talk about Malthus. Now, if you're familiar with the British philosopher Malthus, his essay on the principle of population in 1798, his prediction in the past was that human beings, will always face scarcity of food because population increases exponentially while food production doesn't increase that way. It only increases arithmetically. Now, we were able to beat that because of the advent of technology and the green revolution in terms of food production, among other things, in the 1960s. But if climate change gets really worse, we might face a much more Malthusian scenario than we thought. And all of these great gadgets and technology we have, a lot of them could be completely useless, or in many ways they could be even contributing further to the climate change crisis that we're facing. Now, mahalaga yan, especially for you younger folks in the age group of, especially mga younger millennials and Gen Z, you're gonna feel the full brunt of this during your 30s and 40s and 50s, right? And a lot of us are children and grandchildren that have to deal with this issue. Now, this is not a cause for desperation or frustration or depression, but definitely we have to be vigilant and we really have to focus on this issue because this is going to affect everything in a very significant way. And as I said, the impact will have a multiplier effect. In terms of conflicts, in terms of economic crisis, in terms of damages to infrastructure, in terms of yung life-threatening superstorms and extreme events, coastal communities, all of those things we have to take into consideration. Okay, I'll keep it there. I know na-bored kayo dyan, but I think once in a while we have to do some serious discussions like this. And sorry kung medyo windang pa ako. I was working until like 4 or 5 a.m. so medyo pagod pa ako. But hopefully we can have more meta-alive discussion, especially on issues that are closer to our hearts, yung politika natin, among other things. But for now, I thought mahalaga na pag-usapan din natin itong issue ng climate change kasi nga, this is big and now we're seeing this very, very crucial negotiations COP26 dito sa Glasgow, United Kingdom. So hopefully we get something out of this. Alright, are there some questions before we wrap it up? Okay, I try to keep this as short as possible. Ayan, wala na nagtatanong. Bored na kayo, tinulugan niyo na ako. Puro mga is watching lang. Ito na naman yung mga interview pa ni Tony kay BBM, yung pa rin bang topic? Sige, tanongin natin si BBM tungkol sa climate change. Dito sa mga topics na pinag-usapan natin. But no, but seriously, we have to ask all our candidates for top leaders. Si Bato. Kausapin natin si Bato, no? Hopefully. Anong take niya dito sa climate change, mitigation, and adaptation? Ayan, biglang ang daming reaction nung sinabi kong Bato, no? Yan. Kaya sinasabi niyo ba, siguro naman kailangan natin ng ekonomista or engineer or people who have really some knowledge about dealing with climate change and some of this existential crisis. Yun dapat, no? O yan, may mga galit kay Joe Biden dyan. As if naman may ginawa si Trump kundi mag-troll lang dyan sa issue ng climate change na yan. No, but seriously, I don't think many vloggers, whatever, are gonna discuss these things in a serious way. And of course, this was kind of a spontaneous presentation, but I really suggest you check some of the books. My book, Chapter 8, but forget about my book. But really, this book, The Uninhabitable Earth, is really, really good on this. If expensive yung book, yung Kindle version among others, then I really suggest check also online because may excerpts ng books niya that you can find, no, by David Wallace Wells, no. Actually, meron siyang long essay on this issue that gives you kind of a snapshot of yung mga, I won't say apocalyptic, but very serious situation that we're gonna face in the coming years and decades, no, dito sa climate change issue na yan. Kaya mahalaga talaga pag-usapan, dapat talaga natin yan, no. It might sound a little bit technical among other things. Actually, dun sa UP, Diliman, one of our required, of course, we have these kind of required courses, even if social sciences ka, in terms of natural sciences. And one of the courses I took was environmental science. Now, I'm not environmental science, but I'm saying like that course, that introductory course, kind of helped me to be slightly literate in terms of understanding some of this data and analysis. So, mahalaga yan talaga, we have to have some basic understanding ng issue ng climate change na yan. Not in an alarmist, depressed way, 2012 end of the world way, but in an informed way, in an empowered way, in an engaged way, para pwede na mag-contribute dyan. At para naman hindi tayo mag-elect ng mga leaders ng mga bara-bara lang at walang alam naman sa mga issue na yan, di ba? Hopefully we can get also, competent leaders to deal with these issues. Any questions there? Before we wrap it up and go back to our lives? Yun, ano kaya ang sagot ni Bato? Yun ang tanong ko. I'm sure Bato has great ideas on this, no? Greta Thunberg. Well, she was actually in contention for Nobel Peace Prize this year. That's what I know. Along with Alexei Navalny, but they didn't win. Let's see if they win in the coming years. If Malala was able to win the Nobel Peace Prize, very young, teenager din yata siya when she won it. So, Greta's still in the contention. Greta, she's not an environmental science expert and she's not a kind of a policy maker, but I think she is a great voice for the younger generation. Kasi alam niya, yung generation niya especially maging sobrang apektado dito, no? And we cannot leave this to the old generations na mukhang walang pake about what happens in the 50 or 100 years down the road, no? Not all, but, unfortunately that has been the case in a lot of times na mas pake ng mga politiko is yung long-term economic performance nila to stay in power rather than yung long-term survival of humanity. So this is the issue we have. So I think Greta Thunberg has done a good job, but I hope it's not only Greta Thunberg. I hope they're Asian children, they're Asian non-white environmental activists. I hope they're also being paid attention to, not just some European girl or something like that, because that has been also some issue, no? Some people said na parang Greta lang ang pinapansin ng media, not other also kind of youth activists on the environment issue, especially non-white ones. No? So remember, we're in a kind of Black Lives, Colored Lives Matter era. So these things are also coming to the surface. Host presidential debate. I'm actually very fair and nice guy, but I don't know if the candidates are okay with it. I am fine to do the best of my capabilities, to the best of my ability. Let's see. I think San Beda and some of the universities are trying to arrange it. Let's see. But honestly, I think these issues have to be discussed. Kung sino gusto maging presidente natin, hindi pwede mga bola-bola lang, biro-biro lang, istorya lang. Someone has some basic knowledge and literacy about this issue. Someone na nagbabasa, hindi lang puro chismisan, etc. Midnight speech, mga ganun tipo. Or yung mga tao na hindi na alam yung difference ng ICC at ICJ at nako, yung mga caliber ng mga tao na tumatakbo. Kasi di ba yung nasasaligang batas natin, read and write lang natin yung qualification. Hindi man. Medyo mababa po yung expectations sa presidente. Kung mag-apply ka yatang sales lady or something, dapat college graduate ka. Pero pag presidente, mukhang read and write lang yata. Never man understand. So, yun. Yeah, renewable energy is an important issue. Actually, pwede natin mag-usapan also yung issue of nuclear energy because mahalaga yan because we have yung Bataan nuclear power plant na mothballed no, because of concerns na nandun sa siya isang fault line and hindi siya safe and medyo yung technology niya medyo luma, etc. Well, there are people who are defending that, but generally, you know, nuclear could be one of the options, but ang dami risks and it's very expensive. Whenever they say it's just this, actually the final cost can be several times higher. And nakita natin sa Japan, even in country like Japan, no, so a lot of safety standards were not followed in Fukushima. I visited Fukushima actually, you know, a few years ago and met and actually interviewed Governor Sato, the former Fukushima governor, who complained about some of the bureaucratic irregularities and anomalies dun sa Fukushima before the Fukushima disaster happened. So I'm a little bit familiar with this issue. I also studied the Energiewende case of energy transformation dyan sa Germany, which has not been perfect. It has had its ups and downs, but there are places in Europe which are 100% renewable, and we're talking about solar panel, wind power, and hindi po totoo na pwede mo lang gamitin mga to pag may wind lang or may sun. Diyos ko naman, kaya nga may battery tayo, may storage capacity, at yun ang in-improve ngayon. So hopefully in the coming years and decades, maging mas mura yung renewable energy at meron tayong storage capacity na hindi lang basta pag may wind lang pwede tayo magkaroon ng energy or may sun lang. Hindi ganun yun. So hindi lang renewable, but renewable based on stored energy, right? Para hindi ka lang dependent dun sa environmental cycles. Yeah, yung isa nakita ko nga, ICC sa ICC sa West Philippines. I think he meant ICJ. Just ko naman. These people want to be our presidents. Anyways, wag tayo pumunta dyan. Sinong VP ni Marcos? Bongo. Bong. Ano mang ang tamang bong eh? Bongbongo? Bongbongo. Yun ang yatang totoong ano eh. Yung windmill sa Ilocos, hindi naman yata Ilocos government. Di ba parang European government? Denmark ba? Denmark ba yung nag-fund doon? Alright. Kamusta pa dyan? Mga friends natin sa Milan. How are you? My friends from Italia. Oo, nagbisita ako dyan few years ago. Nung, alam mo, yung mga good times pa. Yung may budget pa tayo noon. Bumisita tayo dyan sa ating mga cousins dyan sa Europe. Pumunta kami sa Milan. I love that place. Although Rome, mas marami kang mapupuntahan at mas mura pa. But anyways, let's not go there. Yan, Bobongo. Bongbongo or something like that. Magiging November 15, well, as I said, hindi lang November 15 yung chance to change. You know, COMELEC could make all sorts of different resolutions that allow for all sorts of replacements until election day even. No? Tignan niyo yung resolution 10-4-20, if I'm not mistaken, September 2018. Tignan niyo yan. Sobrang relax yung mga conditions for replacement, hindi lang November 15. So please, tignan niyo lang yan. AUKUS, I've written about that issue. Hanggang ngayon, nag-troll pa rin ng France and Australia. Sabi ni Macron na sinungaling si Morrison, nag-leak yata sila ng text ni Macron to say na parang troll na eh, yung mga screenshot ang ginagawa nila. Ay, nako yung mga tao niyan. But si Biden aminado na medyo palpak yung diplomacy around that, hindi ganun ka-subtle. But it's all about China, you know? Someone has to do something because tayo sa ASEAN, wala, either takot tayo or sell out tayo or I don't know. Or love China yung ibang leaders dito. So, you know, other countries are trying to come in and do the job of making sure yung West Philippines ay hindi maging Chinese lake. Yep. So, I think that's how you have to understand AUKUS. But let's see whether really they'll develop nuclear submarines or anything like that. Uy, David, wag kang ganon. Wag mo ano yung mga dyan, troll dyan. Hayaan mo na yung mga troll na yan. Sino nag-file ng case kay BBM? Nandun yung picture ko sa ano niya, profile niya. Ano yan? Ano? Yung isa dyan, Biden hater. Kaya nga, ba't kayo nanood kung ayaw nyo naman? Kamusta Jazz, friends natin from California. Yeah! Nga, yung windmills dyan sa Ilocos, gawa ba ni Bongbong yan? Picture na siya ng picture dyan sa windmills. Sila bang gumawa niyan? Siya bang nag-invento niyan? Pag-usapan natin next time yan. Sige. Wala pala kayong pake sa climate change eh. Ganyan pala kayo eh. Pag seryosong topic tayo, mag-lecture type, wala. Baba ng views. Pag purong meta-meta yung discussions, ang daming views. 1,000 yung 30,000, 200,000, yan yung mga views, ganyan. Yun. Yung Project Pilipinas, yes, andyan yung interview namin with Lord De Vera. Lampas sa 2 hours po yung interview namin kay Joe Rogan style, but politically correct yung version na ginawa namin. There's more to come po. No, we're hopefully gonna interview Dr. Onda from UP Marine Science Institute. We have Cecilia from Brazil to discuss Bolsonaro and Duterte. Hopefully we have more other experts. Hopefully to get Jonathan Ong from Harvard to discuss troll farms sa Pilipinas. Hi dyan sa mga friends natin. Hopefully Atom Aralio soon also will have him here to discuss journalism and other things like that. Yan. Grade 12 student from Bulacan. Kamusta po kayo dyan, Daniel? Grade 12. So, ibig sabihin, ano po kayo? 18-year-old ka na? Diba? Parang ganun, diba? Yan. From Japan. Ohayo gozaimasu. Ohayo gozaimasu. Ohayo gozaimasu. Yan. Si Jefferson. Yan. Ano magagawa ng ordinary citizens like us sa climate change? Well, first of all, we have to first understand it ourselves before tayo mag-preach. Read before preach. Understand before preaching. Second, we have to push for... Hindi lang sapat yung turn off your light lang at, throw your trash can, mga ganyan style. You have to really push for policy changes on the policy level. And we have to coordinate and cooperate with NGOs, international civil society groups on this issue. But first of all, we have to really raise awareness on this issue. Oh, wag ganun ha, yung isa dyan. Pero talaga, the move should come from corporations and governments kasi sila talagang may malaking factor dito. Hindi sapat yung mga Earth Day lang na we'll just turn it off. Yung grabe yung pollution na ginagawa ng mga factories, mga pabrika, grabe yung mga pollution yan. So government policy regulation is very, very important. No? Yun. Oo nga, wala yung mga meta dito masyado Meta-metas! Yes! Napanood niyo yan, Flat Earth World Cup? Yan. Baka mamaya yung mga troll farm, meron din sila World Cup mamaya. Sila. Yan. BGC neighbor, di naman ako BGC Feeling BGC lang. Ayaw dyan sa BGC traffic. Ang hindi accessible rest of the city, tsaka masyadong elitista yung mga nandiyan BGC. Anong tayo? Quezon City! Ganun tayo. Alright. Wala na. Wala na kayong paki sa akin. Sorry medyo low low energy tayo na konti. Rusty tagal natin nag FBL live. But I hope you appreciated yung medyo scratching the surface at least on this issue, right? There's definitely more to discuss. But I hope we can do more of this. At least wag niyo ako wag niyo ako wag niyo ako iwanan. Wag niyo ako i-troll, no? Na pag medyo seryoso yung topic. Alright? Para we can continue having these kinds of discussions. Sir, natutunan sa... Salamat po, salamat. Alois Nelove. Okay. Is that sige po, salamat po. Yang mga mata, busy sila. Yan. Flat nose lang. Ha? Ba't nasasabi mo? Flat earth. Yeah, flat earth. Uy, wag yun yan. Public freshman student. Yan. Ann. Salamat for dropping by. Kasi patapos na kami. So please check yung mga ipopost natin na full video version. But hopefully we're gonna have more of this. Bossing, what's your go-to fragrance? Oh wow, an endorsement na tayo ngayon Ano lang? Ano ba yung mga mura dyan? Ano yung mga Axe, mga ganun? Yeah, Adidas. Yung lang? Baka lang ba yun? 150 pesos ba yan? 100 pesos? Yung maganda yan. Adidas Sports. Adidas Sports. Yan, gusto ko yan. Talagang, parang, amoy mayaman, pero ang bayad mo, pang beer lang. Ganun. Parang, dalawang beer, ganun. Yan, maganda yan. Ang hirap na tuloy mamili ng kulay sa report. Ano naman yung report pinagsasabi dyan? Si Roque, ma-hire ba yan sa UN? Tingnan natin dyan. Maano yan dyan sa UN? You can take time to talk about the books behind you. Oh, next time. Sige po, medyo pag-usapan. Ito po, Foucault lang yan. Foucault. Nung college ako sa UP, nagsasave ako ng money ko every month. Bumibili ako ng mga libro na yan. Kasi may bentahan doon na, hindi naman second hand, pero parang medyo mas murang version. Ano lang tayo dyan, malit lang budget natin nun. But, we save money. At over time, it really helped me a lot. Mga 18, 19 lang ako nun, nung bumibili ako. Ay, please, wag nyo kami i-compare dun sa mga, please. Thanks for your comments, Alrod, but please, hindi yan ang mga unreference natin. Okay? Okay, alright. Ay, isa pa yan, yung Sal ni ano. Ano naman sinabi ng ombudsman na yan? Ombudsman ba yan or ano yan? Ay, nako. Anyways, mamaya na tayo mag-meta talks. Ano bang tinitrending sa Twitter? Hindi ko alam yan. Ay, check natin. Ano bang trending sa Twitter ngayon? Busy na naman sila ng mga ino-operate na naman nila yung Twitter. No much naman yung mga meta sa Twitter Wala. Mahina sila dyan. Barry sige, mag-comment ka ng ganyan. Sige. Mag-troll ka pa. Alam mo yung mga nagtutroll dyan, binabasa ko. Mamaya, babalikan ko isa dyan. Ayaw natin dito ng Epal moves. Yes. Best book to really understand politics? Well, there's no way you can do it in one book, but I think some introductory books are really good. Nasaan yung there's this book, I think David Runciman has a good book on this. Yung chair ng Department of Politics in Cambridge. Ayan, Politics by David Runciman. Yun lang title, Politics by David Runciman. That's really a simplified version. It helps you to understand and frame things. And you can check his podcast, Talking Politics. Fantastic. Great guy. I love his stuff. He makes it very simple but at the same time elegant. Hindi yung mga pa-complicated jargons and everything like that. Yon. Yung mga flat earthers dyan. Kamusta kayo dyan? Yan. Yon. Conjugal dictatorship. Binili mo? Mikaela? Libre, pwede mo hanap yan. Download mo lang for free yan online. Actually, hindi mo kailangang bilhin yan. Yung conjugal dictatorship. Alam natin sino yung mga yan. Conjugal, ibig sabihin kahit wala nang isa, yung pera nung isa, alam na natin na saan. Yan. Pogi tips. Ano kayo mga pogi tips natin? Yan. Bawasan ng trolls sa page. Yan. Yan ang number 1 pogi tip. Number 2, matulog ka ng maayos para wala kang eye bags. Number 3, ano bang pogi tips natin? Yan, fresh. Keep fresh. Keep fresh. Read, discuss, learn, magpakabait ka para fresh ka. Okay? Yan. Gets mo na, Reggie? Ganun ang style natin. Para fresh. Okay, ano pa bang natin dyan? Carla, kanina ka pa yung mga troll loves you so much. Wala nga sila ngayon, busy daw sila sa Twitter. Tingnan mo ano yung tinitrend nila dito. Ano mong tinitrend nila? Wait lang, tanggalin ko ito. Ibang pala nakikita ko The world is donut shaped. Okay. Alright. Sige, flat earthers. Sige. Ay, cousin! Happy birthday! Second dinners. Yes. Happy birthday, cousin! Down Sydney, Australia. Mate! Happy birthday, mate! Yan. Nagpaparinig na yung mga iba dyan. Pwede na yata ako pumunta dyan. Tapos na yung mga quarantine requirements. Yan. Kaso cancelled na yata yung Wala na. Isang book mo, Prof. Grabe naman, Jomel. Support naman kay John. Get Kindle version. Bili naman kay John. Prof, do you believe na may troll? Do I believe na may troll? I can see it. So I believe it. Alright, okay. I experienced it. 6 years na po. Birthday mo bukas, Denise? Happy birthday to you. Sige mamaya, yan ako. Private message na kita, cousin. Misty guys, hopefully next year we can meet each other, travel, but keep fresh. Yan. Yan, alam mo naman, may mahugot ako dyan sa Australia. Yeah! Grabe naman! Bobby Andrews. Yung nga, Bobby Andrews. Yung isa si Chappelle. Wala na. Busy mga meta. Kaya nga, wala yung mga meta eh. Inahanap ko yung mga meta. Nasaan na sila? Hindi ko na mamataan yung mga meta dito. Lumipat na yata sila. By the way guys, kung gusto nyo ng ibang more mabait version na talagang konti ang metas, dun kayo sa Instagram ko. No? Richard Haydarin din yung pangalan. Please go there. Dun na lang tayo sa Instagram. Gusto nyo naman yung giga level na mas balahura, punta naman kayo dyan sa YouTube natin. Politica 360, Richard Haydarin. Yan, dun tayo. Kung gusto niya super giga level na balahuraan, Twitter. No? Yun talagang labanan dun. Alright? TikTok. Tanong ko ba si Lord Rivera? Tingnan yung episode namin. Discuss namin yung TikTok. Hindi ako agree masyado kay Lord Rivera. Believe na believe siya sa TikTok. Ako hindi. Tingnan natin ang gagawin natin dyan. Yes, Baguio boy. Yeah. Alright, sige. I'll go back na to my life. May day job pa tayo. But I'm glad that we were able to catch up. Kahit konti lang yata kayo na ngayon. Okay lang. Di ako hurt. Okay lang. Okay lang yan. But next time, ha? Disqualification case against Marcus Jr. Well, there's no legal basis. I think the big issue with Marcus Jr. is that if talaga meron siyang cases na yan and he was supposedly, punished for it, bakit hindi nangyari yan? That doesn't mean he's innocent per se. That says also a lot about our justice system or injustice system, as someone put it. Yeah. Yung sa C, kamukha mo, sino yun sa C? Anong sino si C? Ano yun? Korean ba yan? Amerikano ba yan? Ano yan? Doon ako sa YT. Yeah, YouTube. Tingnan niyo mga YouTube ko doon. Diyan nyo rin makita yung mga podcast namin. Video version. Of course, dyan sa Spotify, Project Pilipinas, Apple Podcast, Project Pilipinas. Paki-check nyo dyan. Per YouTube, meron din. Yan. So may levels tayo. Levels of meta, giga, tapos mabait. Yung mabait yung Instagram. Tapos meta, Facebook. Tapos giga, YouTube. Tapos super giga, Twitter. Tapos yung TikTok, di ko pa naan yan. Medyo ewan pa tayo dyan. Ano, Reggie? Documentaries. Meron maganda dyan na yung History Hit series. Podcast History Hit, the best yan. With Dan Snow. The best yan. Super the best yan. Napakagaling ng taong yan. Galing talaga. Please follow the podcast. And then meron din silang version na parang Netflix of history version. Please check also. Ayan. Thank you, Queenie, for following me on TikTok. Hindi ko pa na-follow sarili ko. Tagal ko yata hindi nag-post yan. Hindi ko alam gagawin ko. Sige, maghanap ako ng ways to actually post there. Alright. Maraming salamat. Are there any last questions before we go? Yung NPA issue, medyo complicated yan. Pwede natin discuss next time. Yung disqualification ng Marcos, sige, separate issue din yan. Major climate change pa yung topic natin just in case for people who are not yung mga late sa class. Ayan. Yan, yung mga late sa class. Obvious kasi yung mga tanong hindi related sa lecture. Alam ko na yan. Yung mga ganyan moves. Sige. BBM kayo. Sige, okay. Good luck. Alright, salamat. Thank you very much, folks. Talk to you guys soon. God bless. Have a good day.